interpreted, and that's what memoir is, and that's certainly what this is.
And so I'm going to use that as a segue, actually, to talk about Midnight at the Bright Ideas Bookstore by Matthew Sullivan. This is a debut, and as a debut, I think it was stunning, and as a book itself, close to stunning. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, but it definitely has a few little flaws, but they were so minimal to me that I really don't even know why I'm leading with it, to be honest with you. It's about a young woman named Lydia who works at a bookstore in Denver. And she's come back after many years of not being there because of her childhood incident that was incredibly tragic, horrific, and has shaped her entire life. Basically, she was the only witness to a terrible, terrible crime that she was rescued by her father and taken out of the town that they lived in, which was Denver at the time. He was a librarian at the Denver Public Library. And books play a very important part in this story on so many levels, even in the bookstore she works at, as well as the fact that the books and the category of books and how you make them shadow your life and make them a part of your life becomes a very much important part of the book, because it defines who these two people are, her father and herself. But also it defines a lot of the people that come into the bookstore. And it starts out with Lydia at her desk doing some sort of checking on books, price checking, and she's called upstairs because there is a body hanging from the top of the ceiling. And it's someone she knows. It's one of her book frogs. And this is someone who comes in almost every day to get a book or two. A lot of these people were almost street people, and she's very upset because this was her favorite one, and she's trying to figure out what happens to him. Turns out he has left her a box of his belongings, and in these belongings, she finds all sorts of clues and strange pieces of books that have been cut out with obvious patterns, so she's got to figure out what they go to. She also sees, and on the spine labels, it's the wrong spine label, the wrong pricing information, the wrong ISBN. And she realizes she needs to go search out for the book that it really belongs to. And she's able to figure out from that how to figure out the code he's left her. And because he's trying to figure out something in his own life, a puzzle in his own life. In the meantime, when she helps take the body down because she can't leave him there, a picture falls out of his pocket, and it's a picture of her and two of her best friends just before this terrible tragedy of her childhood. And I don't want to go into that at all because it really is a journey you want to discover on your own. It's a tough read in some spots because you feel the brutality of this crime that takes place in her childhood. The writer is that good, but it's never described in an overly graphic way. But his use of language makes you really, feel it and sort of shudder from it all. So this book is all about trying to figure that mystery out, but also trying to figure out the mystery of who she is, because she's been running from the Hammer Man for a very long time, and she's got to figure out if she's still afraid of this person and if there's a reason to be. Again, the only real criticism I have of the book is I could figure out the ending a little faster than I think you should have been able to, but I've been reading mysteries for a long time.
I was saying, you've been reading a lot of meta mysteries, a lot of stuff about books within books and plots that tell the story of a mystery. Like there was a 2 Days Gone.
Right.
We book talked
We book talked at the Fireside Chat. By Randall Silvis.
Yeah. Is this anything reminiscent of, it sounds a little darker, but the Book of Speculation?
It is darker than the Book of Speculation, but once again, the life of story, the life of books, fiction in particular, plays an important part in gathering the clues to figure out what the issue is at heart. So they are very similar in that way. I think if you were going to compare the writing styles, I would say that there's a lot more, there's magical realism in that particular book, in the Book of Speculation by Swyler. And this one is more grounded and down to earth. One of the things this does really well, I've never been to Denver, but I feel like I have. It does a really good job of, I think, giving you a sense of what the city is and what being there. And place is important.
Place is really
Place
important.
again becomes a character, and so do the people who are involved in it. And she's got an interesting journey, and at the end of the book, you're not quite sure if she's through with the journey, but she's well on her way. And her father and what happens to him, for a book lover, I don't want to give anything away, but it's just that's worth reading it alone, because his obsession with books and his inability to be with them every day changes who he is, and he has to do something about that.
Wow.
So it's cool. It was very good debut.
That's amazing for a debut.
So Jackie, what have you been reading?
Speaking of the place as a character, I really think my book does that very well. This is also another nonfiction title. It's Adam Gopnik's At the Stranger's Gate. He wrote Paris to the Moon in 2000 and in 2006 At the Children's Gate, which is, Paris is when he and his wife, they moved to Paris for a few years. They have their first child there. And then At the Children's Gate is when they move back to New York. So this is actually almost like a prequel. It's when they first move in the very early 80s to New York from Montreal. He was born in Philadelphia but raised in Montreal, so he's not Canadian but spent a lot of time there. And I actually listened to this. I love to listen to his books. I have read and listened to Paris to the Moon, and others I started reading and then was able to get the audio and just loved the audio. He was a writer. He writes for the New Yorker a lot. He started writing for GQ, and a lot of this book talks about his early years in New York and some of his how he got some of his jobs, which a lot of luck, a lot of just kind of bumping into the right people and being given a chance. But I love the way he writes. He's very erudite, very witty, and it comes across so much more accessibly when he reads it. I mean, when he's talking, it's more approachable. I think when you read it, it can sound stiffer than it is.
Right, but this is more like a conversation.
This is more like a conversation. He's very energetic. He's got this kind of funny nasally voice. It's very New York. Like, I actually assumed he was from New York. He has kind of a Brooklyn kind of, like old school, like Brooklyn accent, but
Philly's got its own.
Philly's got its own, and maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
But it's essays. He primarily writes essays, and the way he does all of his books, particularly the ones that are kind of about his family and his time abroad, and then when they come back, is there's always this sort of theme that goes through it. And this one, it's real estate. It's about the first. He talks about the first apartment they lived in, and then where they subsequently moved. But it's the people he knows. He was accidentally kind of became very good friends with Richard Avedon, the photographer, and was extremely close to him till the end of his life.
Wow.
And so just seeing people like that through his eyes, and the various jobs he had, and how New York was at that time. And it's interesting to compare it to. So New York is a character in this book, and it's also a character At the Children's Gate when they move back. And now they have the family, and so it's a different New York. Like, this is they're like 22 or something when they move. They're very, very young. They have no money.
Is this when they have their first child, though?
No, they don't have their first child until they move to Paris.
Okay.
So they had been together for a very long time. I think they started dating when they were like 16. So they're very young here, like literally 20 or 21 or something. But then they get married while they're living in New York.
Of course, what you can afford in New York changes as you get older because you're making more money.
And he says over and over, I'm not exaggerating. It was their first apartment was 10 feet by 9 feet.
Oh my gosh.
They lived in it together. And I'm sitting there thinking, my bedroom is 10 by like 11, and we can barely fit in that. And he talks about how they lived in it for 4 or 5 years too. And
wow.
I can't even imagine.
God, I really like the person you live with, that's for sure.
Well, he said he didn't realize until they moved out that he hadn't seen his wife in her entirety, like in years, because he only remembered snippets of her because they were never far enough apart. And he said for some people that would have been like the end of their relationship. Like, they would never have, we could not have lived on, I don't think we could live on top of each other quite in that way. But it worked for them, and they and he cooked in there, and like I just can't even, the visual, I'm like, there was a couch, and they like unfolded it at night. I don't know, but I love to listen to him. He's just, he brings a certain intellectualism to his writing, and just does such a good job with it but it's still entertaining, but he's not.
Well, I think it's the ability to bring in the place, and there's like, again, it's these threads, the place, and then the theme of whatever it is, the real estate or whatever. It reminds me of other, you know, people love to do that with cities like New York and Paris, right? There was that one by Elizabeth Bard, it was called Lunch in Paris, and she takes like recipes and she and for her learning about Paris was all about learning about cooking in Paris, and so you actually get recipes that she, you know, so I think that works really well, that kind of weaving of themes.
Who's that, Elizabeth Bard?
Elizabeth Bard, yeah.
And the other part of this that he keeps coming back to is it's kind of a little an homage to his wife, sort of. He really talks beautifully about their relationship and her. He's still very much enamored with her, and he talks about how that's not always kind of the cool thing to say when you've been married for like 45 years, to be like, oh, I still really like my wife. Like she seems very interesting. She's a documentary film editor, and she's a lot of their life is.
So there's character too.
Yeah, there's character too, and because a lot of their life has been built around him trying to please her. And but not in a way
that works, right?
As it should be.
Yeah, and he said, you know, I'm constantly still trying to impress her, and it's very sweet without being cloying. He's not cloying at all. He's very self-deprecating and very, just very interesting.
That's great.
So.
Sounds like
I've read his New Yorker pieces, but I've never read a book. I have to do that. Maybe I will be listening.
Listen.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy that.
I want to listen too.
Yeah, and what is the other book you have here, quickly?
The other one, very quickly, is called Flâneuse. Women walk the city in Paris, New York, Tokyo, Venice, and London. And I like reading these side by side. I'm actually not quite finished with this one, but this is a little bit more slightly academic. The term flaneur is French for a man who walks the city, and it's kind of dates back to, it's sort of a dandy, someone who had the time, the money, and the leisure time to kind of just stroll around and take in the sights.
Meeting people or taking in
just
sight?
walking in and enjoying the city. And you know, very few people would have had the opportunity, the leisure time to do that. I think when the term was coined in the 1800s. And it was never, women could never do that. I mean, back when the term originated, women weren't allowed to walk alone, you know, unchaperoned.
Right.
And
so now this is the modern version.
So kind of reading this about New York, and then this one actually talks about New York a little bit, but she goes to others. She's lived in a bunch of different cities for various reasons, and she talks about the city's personality and other writers and other people, women in history who have lived there. And they're nice kind of companion pieces. They're very different, but she brings a lot of her own personal stories.
Who's the author?
Lauren Elkin. She, I think, primarily lives in Paris now and teaches. She hasn't. I don't think she's written many other things. She writes. I think she's written for the New York Times Book Review, things like that.
So that's actually interesting, because what she's probably done is taken something that really interests her.
Yeah, oh yes, definitely.
And turned it into more of
how it started.
A universal sort of like, you know, study of what. Yes.
She walks in all these cities. And
good for her.
Yeah.
Good grief. That's wonderful. Okay, well, you know, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you very much for joining us. At the end of this film, you'll be able to see a list of the books we talked about. And thank you. Join us at the Beebe Library for more conversations about books.